if you really want technology to be inclusive. That means you have to do more than have a diverse team. You're going to have to actually make sure that diverse team where there is diversity in leadership, which means there's a power structure that's going to need to change.
So today we're joined by Dr. Brandeis Marshall, CEO of DataedX, a data science consultancy. Among many other pursuits, Dr. Marshall develops tools for practitioners to interpret the racial, gender, and socioeconomic impacts of data and technology. Welcome, Brandeis. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Brandeis, good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, David.
We're going to go right to data equity, big umbrella, and talk wide. So, Brandeis, one of the things we want to start with is, what exactly is data equity, and what are some of the consequences of data inequity?
Right, so let me start with what data equity is. So data equity means that your data is inclusive of people of all backgrounds. So that is race, gender, and class. That means that the data itself is doing its best in order to guard against any biases. And this is very difficult because every time you are trying to grab data, you are putting your own past experiences into it. Right? There could be some features that you don't even know about. There are certain things that you have a skewed view of, and this is how you're collecting data. So data equity is really trying to take a step back, thinking less quantitative and try to think more qualitative. What are we trying to obtain? How is this data actually trying to move things forward? So data equity is really trying to move forward, you're right, quantitative people in a way that's a little bit more qualitative, which means let's start thinking about the people on the fringe. Let's start prioritizing those people that are most vulnerable. Let's now try to figure out what is our impact first and not just trying to do things because we can do them. So the way data inequity has manifested in our society is, well, look anywhere. There is spaces where, okay, so I just voted. So I wind up being in a county that's majority people of color, majority Black, to be very specific. I waited in line for 6 hours and 20 minutes. But in a county that is majority white, right, so all the non-people of color, the wait in the line was about 15 minutes. So to me, that's an idea of voter suppression. That is the point of, okay, all of a sudden there is no idea that there's going to be a lot of people coming to the polls. There's not enough polling stations. There's not enough poll workers in places. There's ways in order to disregard the fact that people are trying to do their civic duty. To me, this is all going back to data inequity. If you know the population of a county, you know how many people are registered to vote. You know that there's been a big campaign in order for individuals to be voting, then you can expect that there's going to be a lot of people wanting to vote, especially if it's in person, especially if it's the first day. And then as far as the reporting has come out, that people started to get in line to vote at about 4:35 a.m. and the polling station didn't open until 7. So there are plenty of opportunities in order to know just these small data points and how they have connected to each other to know that this was going to be a long line. However, there was no type of forecasting, there was no prediction. This is when data could have been used more equitably in order to then be able to deal with the influx of people. So that's just to give a very small example, but this happens in every sector of our society, and it happens on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. And for Black people in particular, this is the way we live, is that it's just not fair. Not saying that everything in life should be fair, but this is literally trying to push down, push aside, keep marginalized certain groups of people. And it's very intentional and it's very strategic. And so data inequity happens a lot. So what I'm trying to do is push forward the agenda of having more data equity, to not make those people on the fringe feel like they're on the fringe, and actually include them as part of the main thrust of our society, because we all are equal, but we all don't have equality.
What is it about people who work a lot with data that makes them not realize that they should look at this more qualitative side of it?
Okay, I've been in the computing field for 20 years. and I've taught for majority of that time, right, since I was a graduate student. And what I can say is that when certain people are analytically minded, they have what I would akin to a fixed mindset. And they believe that numbers are facts, and that numbers are the only thing that can be trusted. And so these individuals truly adhere on to the idea that anytime that you are creating something inside of the digital space, the intention supersedes the impact. And so they believe that that intention can somehow be kind of thrust into everyone's understanding, and that is what is going to help everybody. And it's not the reality, right? It's just it's not the way it is. So it's very hard to shift mindset when they're very determined that numbers is the solution, that facts is going to get you to a plausible end. So what I try to do is shift a little bit in how I, speak to them and how I give them examples, because I think it's important that, excuse me, that they see here's some bad impact. So case studies I tend to use, but those individuals then will say, well, that's only one case. So then I bring up another case, and oh, that's just another case. And I say, how many cases would it take? Because how many times have you been writing code and you get an error? You don't understand what the error is. You call it a bug, but you find out it really was a logic issue. So how many times do you go trying to fix an error, and then they will say they'll keep doing it till they get it done? Okay, so why don't you take that same approach when it comes to the impact of your work? And that tends to really set them off kilter. It's an uncomfortable place for them. And so then I say, okay, now that you are kind of getting a little bit of how what you do in code is what you should do in the real world, then it's just a matter of continuing to have the conversations. And then it kind of spins out, right? Because then you're like, it's like all of a sudden you have like a little child who just realizes they understand like their 1, 2, 3s and their ABCs. And then they're just like, everything is like, they want to soak up everything. But there is definitely a difficulty in having people who are very analytical to understand that there is so much value in qualitative approaches, that analytically you want to think about what's happening for the masses, but the people and the items and the ideas that are on the margins actually are the ones you need to think more closely about. And that's where I think qualitative approaches are so much more important, especially in this time where technology and people and data are all in the same soup of the world.
That is so interesting. It sort of sounds to me like what you described as trying to like dislodge a sort of ideology, or a sort of belief system, right? About, like you said, sort of the veracity of numbers and what information you should rely on, right? And you're trying to kind of, it's sort of stuck, like you said, it's this fixed mindset, and you're trying to kind of loosen it up and get people to think about it in a new way,
Yeah.
which seems really powerful.
Yes, and it's very, very difficult because you understand, ever since you were 5 years old, 4 years old, you were, inundated with, math, reading, and they're separate.
Right.
And you either are a reader or you're either a math person. Like, you can't really be both. Well, I was both. right? I danced when I was younger. So I took ballet class and jazz and African and clogging, and I did all that stuff. And I also loved math. So for me, I see the duality of the creative brain and the analytical brain and how they need to be synergistic, because otherwise we're not a whole person. And it's the same thing that happens inside of tech, inside of people who are coding, inside of how you manage data. You can't be one without the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In this duo, I'm the qualitative person and Dave is the quantitative person. In case you were wondering, in case that wasn't clear.
I figured that out.
But that is, in fact, one of the things I think that we really enjoy about working together is we both, right, we come from these two places, but then we have an interest, right, and like you're saying, thinking about it more synergistically. But so that kind of, what it reminds me of is a question that I had that kind of is sort of a different way of tackling the same question. But, you were just talking about, like you said, sort of trying to disrupt this belief system that individuals have, right?
Mhm.
And I was thinking about then kind of taking it up a level. It seems to me that obviously technology, right, which is such a huge catch-all, but that is so top of mind, right, for not just individuals, but for companies and institutions and governments. And I'm always, kind of struck by the way that, there is a lot of conversation more and more, right, about, inequity in technology, things like algorithmic bias and like kind of how homogenous the tech sector is. But then
Yes.
there are all these other conversations that are technology rooted that are also very vital, cybersecurity, right? Like the power of big data, right? That are very top of mind for companies, for boards, for things like that. And it seems to me, right, that they're often very separate, right? So even the kind of, the issues around technology and equity, they still kind of get siloed. But it seems to me, of course, there's got to be a relationship between these topics like, say, cybersecurity and these concerns. So I'm just wondering, thinking, up from the individual to the macro level, kind of how you see that, why do they get separated and what can we do to kind of have this more integrated conversation?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of grassroots efforts, right? There's different organizations, there's nonprofits, there's, of course, for-profit companies that are trying to make these connections between the two. And I think, quite honestly, capitalism is making money the top priority. So when money is the top priority, people aren't the priority. And so making things siloed is actually really good for business, right? Because you have one track that's working on one problem, another track working on another problem, and finding connections between the two doesn't necessarily optimize the bottom line. What optimizes the bottom line is to create as many threads as you can in order to get money. But in order to solve the problem, they want to now create avenues in order to solve it a certain way, because that certain way is not going to detract or mitigate or disrupt their funding channels. The trouble is that in order to really make impactful change, to make an inclusive work environment, to make an inclusive product, you're going to have to work across different sectors. And so that means that companies and organizations are going to have to now cross-pollinate. There's no other way out that particular box. If you really want technology to be inclusive, that means you have to do more than have a diverse team. You're going to have to actually make sure that diverse team where there is diversity in leadership, which means there's a power structure that's going to need to change, right? So that power structure means you're going to have to make people who are, quite frankly, white supremacists, or either having acts of white supremacy at the very least, to step back and stand down. How is that going to happen when money is the ultimate goal?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about raw data.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and data historically can be very messy,
Mm-hmm.
especially as we get older. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means when you try and infer or learn things from that. Is there a good way that you would recommend people think about the underlying data underneath systems that are trying to advise them?
Ooh, that is a good question. Data is everywhere. So how we bring it into our own orbit is what is always interesting, and that can be problematic. So I guess the best way to describe it is to really look at it in the eyes of a child. When a child learns something new, what happens, right? There's all these videos about the first time a child like eats ice cream, and it is like hilarious, or the first time a child, understands what a popsicle is. That is what happens with raw data for us. When we receive that raw data, we don't necessarily know how to navigate it. We're a little stunned by it. So every time we're in a system, that data has been in some way sanitized. And so we have to kind of think back and recall, and I know it's hard to do, and to recall what it's like the very first time we actually saw that content, we saw that data, right? And data comes in many different forms, right? It's audio, it's visual, it's a combination of many different things. But the data, the rawness of data is very helter-skelter.
I mean, it's interesting, kind of what I heard you saying, Brandeis, is we need to bring a certain amount of humility, right, to encountering data. And I mean, I think there's an interesting parallel to what you were saying before about institutions, right? We need to bring some humility to what we encounter, and not sort of think that we have the answer a priori, or even have the framework for understanding, right? Which I think we do. So it's interesting. I mean, the only real work with data I've done is being part of this longitudinal study of HBS that I'm part of. And I've learned a lot there. It's been, I'm not trained, aside from taking statistics, 101 in college 20 years ago, I'm not trained, but I've learned a lot. And one thing that I've learned from the people on the team, who actually can run regressions and who understand data is, oftentimes I'll make an assumption, looking at a table or something, and it might be interesting, but they are, it's easy for them to point out, well, here are some things that you are not considering, right? That sort of change the course. And I think as somebody who likes to impose narrative on things, as somebody who is a reader, it's been helpful for me to realize that, right, when I think what you're saying resonates, because it is about having the humility and knowing that even if you have a story in your head that's very compelling, you can't necessarily impose that on the data. There may be things that, you need to cultivate the ability to see and to be aware, even if they kind of disrupt your, what you would like the story to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason why having groups of people look at the same data with different perspective, different lenses is so vital. That's the reason why having people who are on that analytical side, and also people who are, I love what your word just said, readers. I'm a reader. I have people who are on more of the communication side actually look at the same data, because we see it differently. And that's very important. You can get to the same conclusion, you just see it differently, different paths, and that's okay. That's normal. That's human.
Yeah,
and that makes sense.
I think for people, I mean, and just to be clear, David does read. He sends me articles constantly.
Well, that means that he knows how to send things to be read.
That's true.
Things that
That's true. Colleen, I can't send things to Colleen without having read them, because she asked me hard questions about them. It's interesting. I've written a little bit about the future of workers in this ideal of someone who has a balance of computing skills, applied math skills, and domain expertise. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, what are good ways to bridge domain expertise and those applied math? Because when it comes to data, you have to sort of know something about what you're looking at. If it's, for instance, weather data, and you don't understand how temperatures work in different parts of the world, it's very easy to misunderstand it. The same is true of data about people. If it, for instance, I know that this is a big question in social media, where online use of language, what is considered inappropriate in some places and in other groups is not inappropriate. The use of words is different, how they're used. How do you think about the future of bridging that divide? Is it just people literally with different perspectives, or is there a way to get that into one person?
So I'm of the philosophy that it's not possible to get it in one person. I think you're going to be highly leaning toward one of those three pillars, right? You're going to be in the domain, you're either going to be on the applied math side, or, so I think it's very important that you keep your mind and your work open to other people's perspective, because that is where there's strength. There's strength in the different thoughts. There's also strength in not necessarily compromising, even though you are compromising your own ideals. You are trying to grow yourself. You're in this growth mindset. And the only way to do that is to be around people who are not like you. And the more that you spend time around people that are not like you, the more that you realize the different ways in which data can be easily manipulated. And so you wind up being more human. You're developing your humanity in a way. And that is, to me, is what tech as the big umbrella is missing, is the humanity of it all. I think tech is starting to get there. And I think this conversation around data and the fact that data is a commodity at this point, it's being traded like, I don't know, casino chips. I think it's important that more people have an awareness of how their data is being used and how not one person can be all things. And I think that happens to be the issue in a lot of organizations. They want a data scientist who has 20 years of experience in like 5 different disciplines. That's not going to happen. You're going to need 5 different people, dang it. Like, you're going to need 5 different people. Like, this is just not going to work. But again, going back to my early comments about that ROI, that money at the end. If you can hire one person to do 5 things, why hire 5 people to actually get you to that thing, that goal that you're looking for? So there needs to be that type of shift. But no, it needs to be multiple people. It needs to be multiple people.
And those multiple people, though, you said in there, sort of, they obviously have to have an appreciation of the other sectors.
Yes.
And I think that's where we see sort of this siloed world where people aren't trained necessarily, or even have experiences, like you're saying, in workspaces to sort of gain an appreciation for those other spaces.
Exactly. And I think that's part of the issue, is that because work has been very much, you do your job, you stay in your lane. That means that the silos, are just kind of reinforce themselves. It's hard to get out of that grind. That's the reason why I think, at least for now, we're in this pandemic, which means people have to be online, which means they're trying to find connections in different ways. And I think this is an opportunity for organizations to now try to do cross-pollination, to really start to think through, how is this team and this team working toward the same common goal? What is really the strategic plan? How are these different parts actually moving together? And are they moving together in the first place? Are they designed to move together? How do you design them to move together? And that's part of the work that DataedX is trying to do, is to be that strategic partner in what is happening in your data practices. Where are there silos? What type of skill toolkit do you need in order to bridge this gap? Do you want to really bridge the gap, or do you want it to sit on a shelf? Do you want to be inclusive, and how do you now think through some of your operations in a way that now are looking at data to be informative, to be data informed, not data driven, right? I mean, to really be data informed, to really understand what the data is telling you in order to then now make actionable change within your organization. And how can we strategically get you there? Is it talking to the data analytics team about algorithmic bias and fairness? Is it then going to the frontline workers, right, the cashiers and things, and just talking to them about, okay, how do you engage with customers in a way and get information from them to make sure that their address and their email is correct, and letting them know of different reward systems? Like, there is a lot of richness on how we move toward the same goal, but we do need a more holistic perspective.
I just love everything you're saying about the growth mindset piece. I hadn't thought about that connection, but I totally agree. Right? It's easy for somebody like me to say, well, I'm just not, I'm not really great at math. It's not, like to have a fixed mindset about it instead of saying I have the ability to actually, understand more about what's out there and, than I
Yeah.
I believe. Anyway, I just think that's a great connection. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah. Yeah. And it really is the way we're taught things is also an issue.
as you're talking about sort of how people are educated, who's educated, what these systems that sort of determine who does what basically in society. So I, just would love to hear you talk a little bit about, what are some of the ways that we can create that change, right? It's very easy to say, yes, we need more, people from these underrepresented groups in tech, but what actually, as you see it, are some of those critical pathways for getting folks who are not dominant in that sector and in that field into the industry in a more effective way?
Yeah, so I think a lot about this, and so I would say number one that internet connectivity and machinery equipment needs to be priority. I think that at this point, how connected our world is, how much we rely on systems that are digital, that needs to be in every nook and cranny. So there are places in this country that do not have good connectivity to the internet. And that needs to change pronto, because if you do not change that underlying infrastructure, then everything else is for naught, right? There's no need in order to be giving computers to kids if they have no way to connect to the internet. And so that's number one. Number two, it would happen to be a lot of education on how to use technology. And that means what are some of the pitfalls in doing it too much? What are some of the pitfalls of not doing it enough? When are there good times in order to use technology? Like banking is pretty much online now. So having that type of instruction of fiscal responsibility and financial literacy is important. And that does start with the parents and any guardians of children. Now, moving forward to actually adults, that means that now it's going to be about when to replace technology, right? That is something that is not really discussed at all. When do you move from one mobile device to another? When do you know when you've used too much of the memory? How do you know what is on that particular device and transferring it? So those are just some of the infrastructure things. So in talking directly about technology, same thing needs to happen inside of tech. So things that I do is amplify Black people inside of technology. Those that are in the past, those that are currently to today that I know. And we do this amplification a lot. In the past few weeks, there's been, past few months, excuse me, there's been a lot of Black in weeks. There's Black in computing, there's Black in engineering, there's going to be Black in data, Black in cancer, Black in cybersecurity. This is one effort inside of the Black community in order to amplify ourselves. But why do we need to amplify ourselves when we've been here all along? So there's a number of different ways in which we can now build that unction that being a part of this industry means that you're actually included. Because the way that things are going right now, the way things have gone, is that if you happen to be Black, Hispanic, Indigenous person, you don't really belong in tech. You can get the degree, but you're pushed out within 5 years. And that is what's in the literature. And that is intentional, that is strategic.
What set you on your path to computer science?
Interestingly enough, I talked about this a little bit before, and it was a Gateway 2000. Who remembers the Gateway 2000?
Cowbox.
Yes, yes. Sets everybody apart. You like, what generation are you part of? And so that was, so for those of you who don't know, it was a very cheap machine back in the 90s. And so my father and mother decided to get a machine, a desktop in the house, put it in the very cold basement. I was interested in the icons, and so that kind of spurred my interest. I knew I wasn't going to be a dancer because I am vertically challenged. I'm a people McNugget. So I really was interested in what that was about. And so that really set my course. And I knew I was really good at math and I enjoyed numbers. And so I said, well, what is this coding thing? What is this computer science thing? This seems kind of cool. And so I just pursued that in college. And then as I finished college, it was the dot-com boom. And something in my gut was like, this is not gonna last forever. This is not gonna last forever. And lo and behold, a year later, it had completely busted. So as I was finishing college, I decided to go to grad school because I wanted to finish education. I did not want to stop. I'd seen both of my parents go back to college, both earning their college degrees. And I actually remember going to my dad's master's graduation when I was, a young person, all of about 12. So I knew that education was important. That's what they instilled in me. That no one can take education away from you, is what I was told quite often as a child. And so I wanted to finish. I wanted to be Dr. My maiden name is Hill, so I wanted to be Dr. Hill. And so, and get that over with. So then I can decide what I want to do with my life.
So we'll do our final question, which we ask everyone as a way to kind of end, which is just, for folks who, really care about this issue of data equity, is there one sort of takeaway or one resource maybe that you'd recommend for people to look to?
So when it comes to data equity, I think the one resource would happen to be like a number of books. I can actually share a number of books. I think some of these books have been in the media for a while now, but if you have not read them, read them. Algorithms of Oppression is Sophia Noble. Race and Technology is Ruha Benjamin. And Automated Inequality is Virginia Eubanks. Yes, there are 3 women, 2 Black women and 1 white woman, but I think this gets to gender, race, and class in 3 different perspectives. That is very important. So read those books, digest those books, have book clubs about them. That's number 1. Number 2 would be to hire strategic data equity firms and to really have conversations about what your strategic goals are when it comes to your data practices. So it's not just about helping your organization earn money, it's also helping the retention of your individuals, helping to understand what is the impact of your products moving forward. And also it's about, are you gonna be a good company? Or are you just going to be a company that earns money? So I think the big takeaway is really start to think about your strategic vision in the context of reading those books and bringing that skill set forward to your workforce. And that does mean you're going to have to spend money. That's going to be about educating your people. And it's not going to be an automated system. It's going to be small groups. It's going to be collaborative. It's going to be co-created with firms. Because that's the only way in order to bring humanity into this particular perspective.
That's great. And I think we can definitely make those book recommendations available to our community, along with other book recommendations from other folks we're speaking to. I think we should sort of make sure we're circulating those and urge people, as you're saying, not just to read them, but to talk about them.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marshall. This has been really fascinating and really invigorating. I have lots to think about, and I'm sure everyone who is listening does too. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Colleen, David. This has been fantastic. Hopefully this helps folks, and we can have a continued conversation and some action behind all of these conversations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. That's a wrap on our interview, but the conversation continues.
Remember, we want to hear from you. So please send us your reactions, thoughts, ideas, comments to justdigital.hbs.edu.
You've been watching Pathways to a Just Digital Future,
an investigative project that aims to better understand and address inequality in tech.
This program was produced by the Harvard Business School Digital and Gender Initiatives.
Our team includes
Ethiopia Omari and my cat. Tanya Flint.
One more time. Liz Sarli.
Thomas Jamie다요.
I'm Dave Homa.
And I'm Colleen Ammerman.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
Keep exploring at justdigital.hbs.edu.